Right. Hi, everybody. We've been asked to come and talk with you guys about guided reading and specifically kind of some tips and tricks of what to do in your groups. And I know this is a subject that we have talked about a lot, teaching lower elementary, but hopefully today you'll get some things that can kind of change maybe some things you've been doing or for you to do things in a little bit of a different way that maybe is a little more easier for you and allows you to be able to meet with your groups more consistently. So we're going to start off with how to actually create your guided reading groups. So Meredith's going to give us a little information on that.
Yeah. Okay. So throughout this whole PowerPoint, we intentionally made it a little wordier than probably a normal one would be if we were just teaching in the classroom, so that you can follow along with it now reading or use it as a reference guide later. So I'm not going to go through and read it. I'm not going to have a guided reading group with you and read it to you right now. But it's intentionally that way. But no, don't worry. I'm not going to sit here and read all of this to you. Okay, so getting started, creating your groups. Of course, enrichment time is really that main time that we're focusing on for guided reading. So we're working with 60 minutes to work smarter and not harder. Something that I've run into before is really trying to overextend myself with my groups and think that I've got to have 5 or 6 different groups to meet with. And in my experience, that got so daunting to me that I had so many groups to meet with in such a short amount of time every day that I would just get overwhelmed and not meet with any of them at all, which was extremely counterproductive to meeting with a group. So in talking with Jessica, our sweet spot we have found is about 3 groups to meet with, and you won't meet with all of these groups every day, or you can, some do, some don't. It's whatever really works best for you. But 3 groups for about 15 to 20 minutes a day. Sometimes if I know that my lessons are going to be closer to like 30 minutes a day, I'll just meet with 2 groups a day to be the most attainable for that time. For 3rd grade, you want to work into y'all's kind of updated schedule, seeing your classes 2 to 3 times a week. I know y'all kind of rotate who is with which class, right, for enrichment. So trying to include all of those enrichment kids into a range that's going to fall within those 3 groups. And then I like this to me, this is probably one of the hardest parts to getting started with guided reading and what trips so many people up, because you've got to include do they go to dyslexia therapy? Do they have speech some days? Do they have to go out for other certain things? And I know that's a lot to factor into that schedule. But then, of course, your lower leveled groups you want to meet with the most. And then that higher group, you're going to kind of rotate in and out. And we're going to show some examples of, I'm going to show you my lesson plan for which groups I meet with more often and like how to rotate that in and out. Personally, my groups meet on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday consistently. And then that Friday is kind of a floater day because you never know. You'll have a Veterans Day program that messes up your enrichment time, or you'll have alternate schedule where you don't really have an enrichment time, or any given thing that comes up. You've got to do someone's makeup STAR test, someone's makeup language test. And then you're not able to meet with those groups. And I love keeping that Friday open as kind of like a floater makeup day. Who do I need to meet with a little bit more, or what can I pull people who didn't get to meet with the full group time before? All right. Okay, so, and again, when we're talking about who we group and why, we think that intervention students are receiving, the whole point of guided reading is individualized reading instruction, which your students through TST that qualify for intervention are receiving that individualized instruction with the most qualified people in the world while they're at intervention. So therefore, we don't include them in our rationale for groups because I don't feel like that's the best use of our time within the hour that I'm given. And again, in a little bit, we'll talk about what students are doing when they're not in guided reading groups and how to manage that. And that intentional work, we feel like they need to be doing more than just sitting with us at a guided reading table when that's kind of what they're just coming from or going to when they go to intervention, if that makes sense. And then accent students as well. Every once in a while, you'll get an accent student that falls into a reading level that does require a little extra attention through a guided reading group. And that kind of has to be factored into a little more individualized conference time, either maybe during through AR during their arrival time, or at a reading group at the very, very end of enrichment when they are starting to come back, or if you have a little bit of a block of time during your whole group language time. So that's kind of who we're focusing on with these guided reading groups are your enrichment students that are predominantly with you the whole time. Okay.
I'm going to kind of show you sort of the best way that I've found to put my students in groups. What I like to do is to use the STAR summary report, and you can click on there to sort them by rank. And so they'll already kind of be grouped up by their individual instructional reading levels. So you can use your IRL to place them kind of in some ranges. So if you'll notice, I've left out a couple of students on here because they are my kids who are in accent or who go to intervention. So they're getting that instruction during enrichment time. So mostly that's what's included here are my students who are with me during enrichment, because this is their moment to get that individualized reading instruction. So I've grouped them there, just kind of who can fall in sort of a range that goes together. Of course, you may have some outliers. Kingsley here, for example, is at a 5.9 right now, which is amazing. She's rocking it out. But rather than meeting with her completely alone, that's not as good of a use of my time as to group her with someone else. Her conversation and things like that as well can help to raise the level of comprehension of the other kids in her group. Down here at the bottom, Layla down at the very bottom is one of my kids who was not always in the room with me during enrichment. She's an accent student, but because right now her score didn't really show that she was meeting her full potential, I'm going to make note that we need to do some individual conferences and things like that with her. So I've got my 3 groups here, and I'll do the same for my switch class. And one thing that's very important to think about is when you group your students like this, you want to be sure that you are picking a book that's within the range of the lowest student in the group. Because I want those kids to be able to read the text whenever, if they have to go read by themselves for a few minutes, I want to know that they can attain that level of text. And even though some of the kids in the group will be higher than that, the conversation that we have, the comprehension that we do, that's going to be the part that helps them grow as a reader. I mean, once they're in the level where they're reading chapter books and things like that, we're really focusing on comprehension skills and vocabulary. So they're still going to be getting those things, even if they're maybe not reading in the level that's specifically what it says on STAR. It's still within their zone of proximal development. With your 2 classes in 3rd grade especially, it's going to be really helpful if you can pick the same books for both classes. That way when you plan, you're planning one lesson for each group that can go for both classes, and that's going to help you a lot. These tips and things like that, the most important thing is consistency with your groups. So that's kind of why we've tried to give you some ideas of how to make those groups a little bit more concise, a little bit smaller, so that you can do some things the same with both classes, or keeping your groups manageable. An imperfect group is better than no group at all. Mm-hmm. So you just have to kind of get started and get them in there, and then you'll be able to kind of adjust as you need to with those groups. So keeping a manageable number is going to be a very big thing to keep in mind.
Definitely. Okay, yes. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about kind of what the plan is while you're there. And again, we're thinking like around minimum 15 minutes, maximum 30 minutes, depending on maybe how long your actual reading portion takes or not. But something that we both like to kind of use as a warm-up is just fluency sight word practice, which sometimes to me that seems, when I hear sight words, I think like Emma, like I'm trying to teach her sight words right now. But it's still so important, especially with our beginning readers that we still have in 2nd and 3rd grade, using those sight word phrases. And I mean, 2 minutes, Jessica uses something on her iPad that she's going to show y'all just a little bit, how she uses it just as a quick flash warm up, just to keep it quick and use your time wisely. And then we get into a phonics word work section of our plans, where with lower groups, we're going to be working on those phonics patterns, 2nd grade, whatever that skill, whatever that pattern is for the week, just a review of that. And then higher groups, affixes, for example, is a big one to work on. And then you get to the actual reading chunk of your lesson where you may choose to read the book quarterly, where you're all reading it all together, or it might work a little bit better where each student reads on their own and you kind of confer with each of them individually with how that's going. And then using that time to kind of make notes of strengths and kind of where we need to focus our best time and attention. This picture right here is a clipboard sheet that I've been using this year that's been super helpful for me. I write everything down from their temperatures every day to how I notice they are with certain skills, what they make on different things. And so it's a big gigantic mess by the end of the week, but I can go back to this and see, oh, he made a really low score on main idea with the freckle earlier this week. Let me make sure when we're reading during that reading chunk of time that I'm specifically using my time wisely and asking about that and bringing that up. So that's a good way to make note of that. And then for the discussion portion of it, it's kind of discussion application portion of it, where you don't have to wait until the very end of the text to ask questions and practice skills. This can be something that's done as you read also, and some people prefer questions that are pre-made, like that's way more comfortable for a lot of people, knowing I have questions, I have topics I'm going to talk about throughout this book that are already made. Or if you like it to be a little more inorganic and just see where the conversation leads you. Students may pick out something about the text that you wouldn't have noticed on your own, and then how can your discussion go from there? That discussion portion is also a good time to include application, like maybe some writing within there too. All right, and here is some pictures of some examples. Jessica makes fantastic lesson plans. They are so good. On the left is just kind of a weekly overview. So you see you've got the different groups at the bottom, and then who's going to meet with what. And it only has to make sense to you. I have 7 fantastic, wonderful speech babies this year, and their schedule is kind of all over the place. So it's really hard for me to keep to a beautiful, wonderful, organized schedule. And I kind of just have to fit them in wherever I can. And that's fine. So this would be if I'm meeting with 2 groups every day for about 30 minutes or so. And then you could plan even daily or by book. Jessica has in the middle here an example of a daily plan with 3 groups. So she's got her transitional lower group going first, her middle transitional group, and then her fluent readers at the end. And so she has broken down, she's going to work on their sight word list first, get into a little bit of phonics as an instruction, go through their vocab, and then get to the actual reading and comprehension skills. Or if you like, you can plan by the book as well. And this would be more for people who want to have those discussion questions a little more laid out ahead of time, if that's your flow. So she's got just her fluency example, what she's going to do, how she's going to introduce the book, what their discussion is going to be during it, and then a little bit about some word work at the end, which she's going to talk more about in just a minute.
Too, with the lesson plan, the plan by book, that works really well if you have some sets of picture books and things like that, to actually just take that plan, print it out, and stick it in front of your books. That way you've got it year after year that you can keep referring back to. And then, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the fluency portion of the lesson plan. This is when we're going to be working on sight word phrases, anything like that, just to help them with that automaticity of those words. So one thing you can do is you can have sight words or phrases on a card. And a little tip is to kind of punch them on the bottom, because again, you're trying to do this in 2 minutes. And so if you punch it on the bottom, after you guys read that word, you can just drop it and keep going. For your on-level kids or your lower level kids, you may want to use words that are part of your pacing guide. I've been using the Fry list just to kind of build on those each time, because there's Fry 100 all the way up to 600 and 700. So that kind of helps me to have something to pull from that's differentiated. When you do this, there's also a digital version that I have of the Fry words that I can share with you guys, and that's linked here on the PowerPoint in a few minutes. But with this, these are just on iBooks, and again, I can just keep flipping them. one thing that can be a true time suck when you're trying to do stuff like this with your kids is to hold up the card and say, okay, who knows what this word is? I mean, that's why they're with you, because they don't know what those words are. So one of the best things that I've found to do is just to echo those words together and just keep coming back to that same list for a few weeks, and eventually the kids are going to get those on their own. So for example, I would go like this: sight, and they would say sight, some, summer, summer. And so we just kind of keep going back and forth like that. And I train them to focus on the word itself. Then we'll go backwards through that list and they'll read it on their own. So they'll just read really quickly: summer, some, sight. And they get really excited once they start to know them, and you can start flipping them where you're flipping them before they really even finish reading it, just to kind of teach them, like, those words you know by sight, you can read faster and faster like that. Mm-hmm. There's also phrases, so that's really good for your higher kids, just to teach them how to choose those words instead of reading word by word every time. And that's going to help them a little bit with their 1-minute reads and stuff like that on AIMS. You can also do short paragraphs. So from time to time, your students can read a paragraph either that you've printed from somewhere, or it can even be something from their book. Maybe choose a page in the very back of their book, and that every week or so, maybe you set a timer and see how fast they can read that page. So here's an example of that here, if you guys can see, where I've just taken a page, I wrote down the page number, what date it is, and just kind of did a quick running record of how well they did in that minute. And then I can keep tracking his progress the next week and see how well he did on that paragraph the next time. It also gives me an opportunity to look at what errors they're making and some things like that. Another way you could do that is with sticky notes. And this one's a little bit messier, but if you just grab a sticky note and do kind of the same process, be sure that you date it and what they were actually reading in case you need to go back and reference the page, and then just keep it all together here. But that's helpful too whenever you get ready to go to TST, mm-hmm. And you need to be able to note strengths and weaknesses and things like that. But again, that's just 2 quick minutes that you're doing that, and then you're going to move on to your word work section. Okay, so for word work, it's really good to use magnetic letters or a mini dry erase board for building and breaking words apart. In just a second, I'm going to kind of show you a progression of skills that I use to plan my lessons for the week. Some other things that you can use is analogy charts and Okonon boxes. So for your lower level kids, like we talked about, you're going to pick a phonics pattern that they need to know. Let me turn on the lights real quick.
And just to echo kind of what Jessica was talking about with the sticky notes, and like I said earlier, it only has to make sense to you. I'm the only one that's going to be referring back to my crazy, messy notes, so don't let that stop you from taking them.
Yes, you'll know what it is. And if you write down the page number, you can just go back and look at that page number instead of having to print it out every time. Right. Okay, so with your lower level kids, or your on grade level kids even too, you're going to pick a phonics pattern that either appears in their book or that you've noticed that they're having trouble with. So it may be your same pattern that you're doing for your spelling words, and that's fantastic, and you can just use that. For some of your kids that are a little higher, you might have to look at some other resources. One book that I've found to be really, really useful is this one that we're going to link for you here too. This is by Jan Richardson, The Next Step Forward in Word Study and Phonics. And it gives me each level of readers. It'll give me the different types of skills that they're going to see in that level book. So that sort of helps to build a progression of what exactly you want to go over with those groups. Mm-hmm. But you're going to pick that pattern and you're going to introduce it to them, and you're going to discuss some different words that include it. The next day you might do something with an analogy chart. Like on the other side, I gave you an example of EA and the 2 sounds of EA, that it could say E or it could say eh. So you would introduce that to them and then discuss some words with that pattern. So maybe you put bead up here at the top and bread over here, and then you would give them words with that pattern, and they would have to decide, is it saying the short E sound or the long E sound? Another tip when you get finished with something like this, as they erase it, don't just let them erase the whole board. Make them reread the word and then erase it, so they can kind of whisper, read it, and re-erase it themselves. Then after that, you're going to do some more work with that pattern by making words with magnetic letters and breaking them apart into chunks. And then finally, you want them to be able to spell words with that pattern just from you calling out different words like that. For your higher groups, like your above level groups, 4th grade, 5th grade level groups, you want to start to work on more affixes, some prefixes and suffixes that they're going to see, because that's going to help them to attain more vocabulary words and things like that that they'll see in their books. So with this, you'll do kind of a similar thing. You'll introduce it, let them build some words with that, let them write them, break them apart, just sort of work with that throughout the week. And that's going to only be about a 2-minute part of your lesson, so don't let it take up the whole time. It's okay too if it's more direct instruction instead of you asking them what something says and having them repeat it to you over and over again, because you're going to be working on it every time they come for a couple of minutes. Right. Here are some of those resources that we talked about, the book that I referenced that has lessons really broken down for you. Then 2nd grade has all of these toothy task kits in their drive that you can use, and I would imagine they'd be willing to share them with us. And then the digital flashcards that I showed you on my iPad, those are on Teachers Pay Teachers, and I can share them with you too. It's just a super big file, but we'll work that out somehow. But there are tons of different words on there, and that's been kind of the easiest way to store them.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so the next kind of component of our lesson plan is the reading part, the book part. And Jessica is going to share an incredible comprehension resource with you in just a second. But the problem that I used to run into also was I don't have anything for them to read, which is ridiculous. But how am I going to have sets of books? What's my resource going to be? Of course, with EEF money, Scholastic has book orders all the time for $1 and $2 that you can make sets of 6 out of. I love at the book fair every year too, when Miss Ainsworth gives us that money to use, getting sets there, because I can actually put my hands on it and flip through them and see if it's meaningful. Readingatozee.com is great for your lower level readers, and you can get that free trial to download and print those books. Myon and Epic, of course, is fantastic, and then you automatically have sets of all the books because they all have on there, and you can easily send them to their mailboxes and have it easy for them to access. Scholastic news articles are probably my favorite thing to use in guided reading, just because it's so meaningful to them and they get so engaged with the different topics. Nonfiction texts can sometimes be not as exciting and a little more less adventurous with the plot and everything, but that's one of my favorite things to use, and there are tons of resources for using that in a meaningful way as well. ReadWorks is going to give you a little bit more test passage practice, which is great, and their questions are great too if you don't want to come up with your own. And then, of course, borrow from each other. 2nd grade, I know we have the library in our workroom where you can check out different levels of books, and I know tons of teachers have lots of sets they've accumulated throughout the years. Most of my sets of books actually have other teachers' names on it, and that always freaks my kids out. Like, you stole someone's books. But I have tons of those, and that's all I've accumulated. So those are great to share. And then Miss Ainsworth has tons of sets, big tubs of chapter books as well, if that's what you're looking for. And something I've found when I'm going through ideas, like the book that Jessica was kind of telling us about, this one, you'll have one book that uses Fountas and Pinnell. You'll have one book that uses Lexile levels, one that uses AR, and that can make your brain explode. So this is a great chart, and I actually have this printed in my guided reading binder, so I can just reference real quick what everybody is, and so you can easily see how different levels correlate to different types of data. So that's a helpful little tool to have. Okay, and now Jessica is going to share with you the coolest guided reading resource I've seen in a long time.
Okay, switching to 3rd grade, one of the biggest things that I had to switch my mindset on was it's not going to be a short book that we're going to sit together and read all in one day. We have to read chapter books because that's the kind of level that these kids are on. So one of the resources that I've found in doing that is a trifold novel study that's on Teachers Pay Teachers. And I'm going to just kind of share the components of that in case that's something you're interested in. It has really helped me to stay organized. But you could also use this same sort of setup with any book that you want to do. So basically what it's going to come with whenever you get it is it's going to have an instructional guide that's going to kind of break down the different things that you're going to look at each chapter. So I just have a binder that has each one of my groups kind of separated. They're written on the front with some different notes about them. And then behind that, I keep the instructional guide. And so that just sort of helps me when I plan each week, and I can just simply put a check mark by what we're going to do so that I can open it up and see exactly what we did last time. And then it's going to come with a trifold comprehension sheet that's going to kind of spiral through several different skills. And that's one thing that I really liked about it, because with PACE and STAR, I can try to just stick with my weekly skill on the pacing guide, but sometimes for my different level of readers, that's just not appropriate, and it doesn't always fall in with every book. So I've enjoyed kind of spiraling through the different skills because it keeps them fresh in their mind for whenever we do take those assessments. But it's just going to have one little question each day, and it gives them an opportunity too to practice written responses with races and things like that on several of the pages. And then other ones are a little bit quicker, like the Venn diagram. It also is going to give you a little vocabulary word for each section. So I just have my kids organized in folders, and they keep their little trifold in the front pocket. We kind of write down what we're going to read, which I would encourage you, especially with some of these chapter books and things, to read as much of it together as you can, not necessarily you reading it to them, but everybody kind of at the table reading at the same time, so you can just sort of experience the story together. It also allows for, if there's any clarification of what's going on, you guys can talk about it. So I would encourage you to do that as much as possible, but there will be times that you maybe need to send them back to their seat to read on for your next lesson. So we just write that down on the first page of what they need to do. And then there's going to be a vocabulary piece for each chapter as well. There's just one word per chapter. So we either look it up before we start if it's a word that they're not going to have any clue about, but most often we go back and use context clues to sort of help them see how that applies to their real life as a reader, that they're going to come across words that they don't know. And like we talked about it before, especially with our higher readers, the vocabulary piece is key to keep them growing, because they've just got to know as many words as they can. One other component that was really teacher friendly for me, especially with this, when you have 6 different groups, because you're meeting with 2 classes, sometimes you're not always going to be able to read the chapter with them or ahead of them, or maybe you haven't read it this year, so you need a refresher. So it comes with an answer sheet for each thing, which just kind of really helps you to not postpone meeting with that group because you haven't gotten to read the chapter yourself. They can go ahead and keep going, and you still have a guide of where they're supposed to be headed with their comprehension. So that really helps, again, for you to be consistent in meeting with them as much as you possibly can. So that's been something that's been extremely helpful. I partner up with Miss Peabody a lot on sharing books, and we'll share the different things that we buy and purchase for our novels and stuff like that. So that's been really helpful.
I told
the
you
link for these was at the bottom too.
Yeah, see, told you that was cool. And I looked her up, and she has a lot of books. But then, of course, if there's a book you've got your heart set on, there's tons of other on TPT, like sets of papers that you can do to kind of work through chapter guides as well. I just thought those were really cool.
And year by year, if you pick a book that you want to do and you think of questions, write the answers down for yourself for next year, because that really just is so freeing to know I've got the answers down. So if I don't get to go refresh myself on the chapter, we can still get together and meet as a group.
Yes. So good. So good. Okay. So just some other little tidbits for within comprehension with the group. And this doesn't have to be with chapter books. It can be with picture books as well, giving them different reciprocal teaching tasks, making it a little more meaningful for them, getting them a little more involved. These are just some examples of some that you can do where students are assigned a different role, and after reading, each person kind of gets to share their part, and it gives them a meaningful time to talk. So they're not talking the whole entire book, like this is what you're looking for, this is your job, you're going to share this at the end. Something else that I really like are these little comprehension strategy tasks that I have printed on little popsicle sticks. And sometimes I'll kind of put them in a cup or something, and we'll blind pull one out, and then we have to talk about summarizing or what was the main idea of that text. So, and those are all on the drive, and I think those are really good, really helpful. So while the kids are at your table, what is everybody else doing? What is meaningful in order to be able to get the most use of your time? This is another really struggle that we run into, to not be interrupted. And that's where I love my Minnie Mouse ears that someone brought me back from Disney one year, and I almost wore them the whole time, but I didn't want y'all to make fun of me. So something that I put these on when I'm working with a group, and basically this means you can't come talk to me unless there's an absolute emergency that has to be addressed at that time. And you're probably gonna have to be really explicit with exactly what that declares as an emergency, classified as emergency, so they know when to and when to not interrupt your group. And I like for students to know that you, as a class, in a meaningful, quick way, you can try to solve problems yourself. And then, of course, if that problem arises and we can't solve it, then you're available to come up to me. Just to make sure, because nothing is more frustrating than you've sorted your groups, you've got your lesson plan, you've got your resources ready, and then you get interrupted 15 times and can't even get meaningful work done. So that's just something to talk within your class to make sure everyone knows exactly what the procedures are, and get you some cute Minnie Mouse ears too. And then, of course, we're not going to get into enrichment too much, but this is just kind of what Jessica and I use for what students do while we're meeting. Different enrichment tasks, 3, sometimes 4, and this is all done digitally. 99% of our enrichment work is done on their iPads. So something Jessica likes to have her students do is when they're done, they just kind of flash their screen real quick before they go up and mark their number off. I kind of keep it pulled up on my computer or on my iPad on the side so I can see what they're working on Google Classroom. And this is my little Google Slides drives, because virtual teachers, you are on my heart, and I was thinking how to make this meaningful for you as well. So that's just something that's easily digital, where they just click on the little things and work on that. And then always have a plan for what to do when they're finished, because number one question, you finish explaining everything, number one question, what do I do when I'm finished? So go ahead and have that planned out as well. Okay.
And this is our quote for the whole session. If you take nothing away but this, please take this away, that you don't have to get good at something before you start doing it. Just start, and you'll get better and better each time. So you'll get good as you get going. So just go ahead and break those people up into groups. Try to make it as manageable as you can for yourself, and just start meeting with them. You're going to love the time with your kids love it. So if it's something that you've been struggling with, don't let that hold you back anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's some other additional resources. Several of the tips with the folding things down and that kind of stuff comes from Jen Jones, and she has a whole free guided reading Facebook series that I think has 13 videos that you can watch, or even put it on and listen in the car is really helpful too. So I've linked that here for anybody who wants that. And then there's also some great guided reading resources on Scholastic that are linked here to kind of help you with some different activities, or if you want to see something more in practice, you can check those too.
Yes. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. So I think maybe we'll be able to answer some questions, and hope there was at least one little nugget that you can take away and use in your classroom tomorrow. So yeah. See you later.
Thank you.